Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Peres coming to you from Baltimore. The ceasefire between Kiev armed forces and rebel forces has completely broken down. Many people said it only existed in name anyway. At least 30 people have died in the shelling in the Ukraine port city of Mariupol, and damage to homes has displaced over 1,000 people. Also this month, Ukraine marked a tragic milestone. Over 5,000 people have died in the civil war just since April 2014 alone. The UN says the toll might even be considerably higher. The UN also reported that 900,000 people remain displaced inside Ukraine and about 600,000 have left the country. Joining us now to discuss all of this is Serhiy Kudelia. He is assistant professor of political science at Baylor University. He is co-author of the book, The Strategy of Campaigning, which was published in 2007. He recently returned from a trip to the eastern region in Ukraine. So thank you so much for joining us, Serhiy.
Thank you for inviting me.
So what is the latest in terms of the fighting, and how have both Kiev and the rebel governments responded to the shelling of Mariupol?
Well, both of sides responded predictably, of course. They all blamed each other. And that has been the trend, really, over the last many months. Whenever an event of this proportion, high lethality, happens, where a lot of civilians die, both sides tend to accuse each other of being the perpetrator of the attack. The latest round of violence that has been the worst, really, since the ceasefire in September, I think should be really understood in the context of the failure to start serious negotiations on a comprehensive agreement to settle the conflict. The ceasefire that was forced on the Ukrainian side in September, when they realized that the rebel forces are receiving substantial military support from Russia in the form of the Russian regular troops, that ceasefire was effective only as long as it could be effective, only as long as both sides would continue their negotiations on how to settle political dimensions of the conflict, because ultimately it's about politics rather than other issues that has been driving this conflict all along. And initially, there had been expectations that the Ukrainian side would be serious about political settlement, because President Poroshenko has been claiming many times that he is the president of peace, that he is interested in the political solution, not in the military solution. But none of these words have really backed up with action. There have been no serious attempt to recognize the rebel side as a negotiating partner. There was no attempt on the Ukrainian side to start talking to the rebels directly, rather than through mediators. And there was really no one who would represent the Ukrainian government officials other than the former president of Ukraine, a very discredited individual, Leonid Kuchma, who really has no authority inside Ukraine and really has no official powers and no official position. So the ceasefire agreement was not really followed up with any serious negotiations, and that led to the gradual increase in violence that really accumulated and became really substantial over the last 10 days.
Professor Kudelia, you just referred to the real issues, that the parties are really not interested in addressing the real issues. What are the real issues?
Well, the real issues, of course, had changed over the period of this conflict. It started in March as an attempt to acquire certain guarantees, certain assurances from the Ukrainian government that the region of Donbass would receive substantial cultural and political autonomy, and that it would receive a special position, special additional powers for self-government within Ukraine. But after several months of fighting, obviously the position of the insurgents hardened, became more irreconcilable. And really now it's about the real issue is about how to divide Donbass and how to find a temporary solution, a pathway to the separation of the parts of Donbass that are now being controlled by the rebels from Ukraine. There have been a number of scholars who came up with this argument that the Ukrainian authorities would not be able to recapture this part of Donbass without substantial losses. And even with a lot of losses, it will be very hard given the extent of Russia's commitment to support the rebels. So the best option for all sides involved, especially for the people on the ground who suffer most, for the civilians who are being killed on a regular basis there, is when there is a political solution on giving an extended autonomy to this region where you would have no interference into their affairs, and gradually, over a certain period of time, a recognition of that part of Ukraine being basically taken out and existing outside of Ukraine as a separate state or as a part of another state.
Right. So what is the extent of control that the rebel forces have throughout the eastern region?
Rebels control only about a third of this region, which is called Donbass. Really, most of their the territory they control is within Donetsk Oblast, much less within Luhansk Oblast. But in these areas, they control a lot of urban centers, like Donetsk and Luhansk, like Horlivka, for example, a number of other towns where you have a substantial industrial production still there, and most of the coal mines, actually 2/3 of all the coal mines, about 70% of all the coal mines, are concentrated in the areas that are controlled now by the rebels, in addition to a number of metallurgical enterprises and so on. So there is an substantial economic assets that Ukraine would be losing if it gives up on attempts to take control of this territory. But the positive side, of course, would be that they would be able to at least secure control over that part of Donbass that is now under the Ukrainian government's control, and further on secure the rest of the eastern parts of Ukraine from any possible attacks from the insurgents.
Right. And I know that this current ceasefire obviously didn't last that long, but what prospects are there for a ceasefire, and how can it be achieved?
I think at this point in time, much will depend on the position of the West. The Ukrainian authorities I don't see that they are willing to negotiate any new ceasefire at this point in time. The rhetoric has been escalating. Obviously, there have been recent decisions. Today, the parliament voted to recognize the Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic, these two entities, as terrorist organizations. So really, there has been an escalation even in the level of policy now that they're recognized officially by Ukraine as terrorist organizations. Obviously, it's even harder to deal with them directly. But there is no way around it. And the United States and the European Union should use their leverage with the Ukrainian authorities, with President Poroshenko primarily, to push the Ukrainian side to a negotiating table and to attempt to help the Ukrainian government to find a political solution to this crisis. Of course, much will also depend on the position of the Russian Federation and the extent to which Russia would be willing to commit itself seriously to the negotiations. And so that's also something that the United States and Russia should resolve between themselves on the bilateral basis. So here, really, the position of the West is crucial because you need to communicate your position and your plans, your goals, both to the Russian Federation separately and to use leverage to persuade the Ukrainian government to start negotiations.
So, Professor Kudelia, let's take up some of those issues you lay out in our next segment, where we'll do more analysis. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'll be happy to join you.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.